When I was 10, my dad, Robert, unexpectedly found out he'd inherited a huge fortune from his great-uncle. Apparently, a bunch of charities had assumed Uncle Henry Jones didn't have any family left, and they thought they were about to split nearly $3 billion. But instead, the entire inheritance went to my dad. He even managed to grow that fortune during the good years of the economy, and by the time I turned 21, I ended up inheriting $1 billion myself. I could probably fill a whole book with stories about the struggles my parents, Robert and Linda, went through during the first 10 years of my life. Poverty, marital issues, the whole deal. But this isn't about those hard times, like how I used to always save the brownie for my TV dinners. This story is more about the crazy times, like when my dad bought the biggest yacht in Monaco just because he wanted to say we had the biggest yacht in Monaco. Even when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Disney. A big part of that was hearing my classmates brag about how their families went to Disney World every year, while mine settled for trips to a small amusement park outside of Philly called Libertyland. One year, though, my parents finally drove us down to Disney World, and I was completely blown away. I could see the difference in quality and attention to detail compared to places like Six Flags or Libertyland. Disney was just on a whole other level. Now that I've got two young kids of my own, Ben and Emily, I want to make sure they get everything I didn't have growing up. And let's be honest, I want to enjoy the newest and coolest stuff as an adult too. There's something exciting about having those experiences for myself while also giving my kids the best of everything. I've stayed in the same suburban neighborhood outside of Philadelphia where I grew up. There's a certain comfort in being here, but I'll admit, part of me also likes the idea of showing off a little, proving to the people I grew up with that I've done well for myself. That's why I enrolled Ben and Emily at Cedar Ridge Academy, a fancy private school just outside Philly where some big names, like the Carsons, once attended. And as for Disney, we've been there so many times I've lost count. Disney loves people like me, folks who spend big but bring small groups. For example, if I spend $25,000 on a weekend trip for me, my wife Sarah, and our two kids, that's just 4 people. Meanwhile, another family might only spend $500 for the same trip, which means Disney would need 50 to 100 of those families to match what I spent. That's a lot more people, longer lines, and a much more crowded park. So yeah, I get invited to special events and memberships that most people don't even know about. Sure, it's a way for Disney to squeeze more money out of me, but if it makes the experience better for my family, I'm all in. A perfect example? I got a call one day from a Disney VIP coordinator named Dave. He asked if I'd be interested in joining an exclusive club called the Boardwalk Roy Membership Club. The catch? It cost $75,000 to join, and I had about 30 seconds to decide. I'd never heard of this club before, but Dave told me there were only 40 members total. That was all I needed to hear. 75 grand wasn't a big deal for me, and I wasn't about to miss out on a chance to join a super exclusive Disney club. Dave said, "Fantastic. I'll send over an invoice. Be at the Boardwalk Pavilion next to the ESPN Zone on March 28th at 5 p.m. for your first introductory meeting." I said, "Yeah, sure. I'll be there. Thanks for the invite." To be honest, I don't have a traditional job, so I'm available pretty much anytime. I like to think of my volunteer board memberships as work, but they're really just unpaid roles with nonprofit groups that mainly exist to ask me for donations. March 28th rolled around, and my family and I flew to Orlando. We actually left on Friday, March 26th, and stayed at the fancy Grand Floridian Resort. Like always, we hit up all 4 Disney World parks. Then, on Sunday the 28th, I split off from my family at Epcot and headed to the Boardwalk Pavilion for the introductory meeting of the Boardwalk's Roy Club. I arrived fashionably late at 5:15 p.m., and by then, all 39 of the other attendees were already there. Dave greeted me with a big smile. There were 25 men and 15 women, and everyone seemed really friendly. I'm usually good at gauging someone's financial status within a few seconds, and it was clear most folks in the room were just millionaires, not even close to having $100 million in assets. Me? On a good stock market day, my net worth is comfortably over $1 billion, and I carried myself like it. That's the kind of vibe people, especially Disney, are drawn to. It's like how other ball players flocked to Mickey Mantle or Hank Aaron back in the day. The room was spacious, with an open bar serving unlimited cocktails and light snacks. Disney brought out their A-team, young, attractive staff in their 20s who smiled nonstop while catering to all the Roy Club members' drink orders. Later, Dave wheeled out 40 laptops and set them up on plastic fold-out tables with chairs. We all sat down and logged in. What popped up on my screen blew me away. Thanks to Disney's extensive security cameras and facial recognition technology, they had created a full movie of my family. It showed me, Sarah, and our kids, Ben and Emily. From when we first started visiting the parks, back when the kids were toddlers, all the way up to our visit last month. Watching my son Ben, now 10, and my daughter Emily, now 12, as tiny kids again brought tears to my eyes. Honestly, I'd have paid $75,000 without hesitation for that movie. It made the cost of the Roy Club membership seem like a steal. Just as I thought the night was winding down, Dave announced one more surprise. Another movie appeared on my laptop, and this one floored me. Somehow, Disney had preserved nearly 30 years of security footage. Using the same facial recognition software, they pieced together a video of me as a kid visiting Magic Kingdom with my parents. There I was, 10 years old, with Robert and Linda. I watched my mom pull a peanut butter and jelly sandwich out of her purse and hand it to me for lunch. That moment brought back how little we had back then. I didn't even ask for a soda. I just drank from the water fountain. The whole room was in tears as the meeting wrapped up. It turned out everyone in the room had childhood memories of Disney, and the videos brought those moments flooding back. As I was leaving, Dave pulled me aside and said, "Pretty incredible videos, huh, Mike?" I nodded and said, "Yeah, Dave, they caught me completely off guard. That was unbelievable." He grinned. "Glad you liked it. Hope to see you at our monthly meetings." I said, "Absolutely, I'm looking forward to it." The monthly meetings came and went. They were good, don't get me wrong, but I couldn't help wondering what Disney had in store for the next big surprise. At the July meeting, Candace pulled me aside with a secret to share. She told me about a super exclusive group called the Disney Cadillac Mouse Club. She made me swear I wouldn't tell a soul about what goes on at those meetings. From what she hinted at, it sounded dark, macabre, even. It was a club for the ultra-rich, invitation only, and once you were in, there was no turning back. I was fascinated by what she was saying. Honestly, other than the kind of wealth oil sultans have, there's not much money can't buy for me. After the August meeting, I decided to ask Dave about it. I kept things vague, casually mentioning if Disney had an even more exclusive club. He neither confirmed nor denied it existed. Sensing an opportunity, I hinted that money wasn't an issue. Dave said he'd get back to me by the end of the next week. I was on edge every day waiting for a response. Money really isn't a limitation for me. At one point, I even thought about partnering with Disney to build a new luxury hotel on their property, something like the Swan and Dolphin hotels. Finally, Dave reached out, but his request caught me completely off guard. He said Texas was executing a death row inmate that week, and he had a ticket for me to observe. I thought he was going to ask me to run a Disney marathon or something as an initiation, but this, it left me speechless. Still, I agreed. Sure, why not? I'll go watch the execution. Honestly, I figured watching an execution would be easier than running a marathon anyway. I booked a flight to Texas and found myself in the viewing booth, waiting for hours. The execution needed final approval from the governor's office before it could proceed. Most of the people in the room were family members of the victim. After 7 long hours of sitting and waiting, they finally brought in the condemned man, a guy in his 50s, and strapped him to the table. By that point, I was so bored from waiting that I didn't care about his last words or anything else. His arm was already prepped and tied down, and they injected him with a solution. He quickly fell asleep, and that was it. My best summary of the whole experience? Uneventful. Later that evening, Dave asked me a few questions. "What did you feel?" he started. "Honestly, Dave, after sitting there for 7 hours, I just felt bored," I said. He chuckled. "How did you feel when they brought the prisoner into the room?" "I was hungry, Dave," I replied. "I just wanted it to be over quickly." He pressed on. "And how did you feel, knowing you watched that man die?" I paused to think. The truth? I didn't feel much at all. Mostly, I was distracted, thinking about how the Eagles blew that game last week. I kind of tuned out the crying from the family sitting nearby. Dave laughed again. "Perfect, Mike. I'm going to recommend you for Mickey's Cadillac Club membership. The fee is $2 million, paid annually. Are you interested?" Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, Dave, that sounds great. Send me the invoice." I didn't want to risk messing anything up by questioning Dave's motives for sending me to watch the execution or how that connected to the so-called happiest place on earth. So, I paid the Mickey's Cadillac Club invoice in full and waited for Dave to let me know the date and time of the next meeting. 2 days later, Dave got back to me. He said the Cadillac Club's meeting would be held in a week, on the 1st of the month, inside Cinderella's castle. That gave me just enough time to prepare and make arrangements. I decided to mix things up this trip and booked a stay at the Polynesian resort. This time, I left Sarah and the kids at home since Ben and Emily's activity schedule at the Hill School was too packed for them to join. The week flew by, and before I knew it, I was back in Orlando for the Cadillac Club meeting. For all the money I'd spent at Disney over the years, I'd never actually been inside Cinderella's castle. When I arrived at 1 p.m., I was blown away by how luxurious it was inside, and by the fact that, even as our meeting went on, the Magic Kingdom was buzzing with visitors right below us. Dave chaired the meeting, and there were 9 other men in attendance. I could tell from the way they carried themselves that they were on the same level as me when it came to wealth. Dave made us feel like owners, laying out some of the real challenges Disney faced. He talked about problems like rats and, worst of all, homeless people who somehow managed to sneak onto Disney property. In an impassioned tone, Dave said, "I know every one of you has been coming to the Disney parks for years, and I know not one of you has seen or heard of a homeless person, or, as I like to call them, bums, ruining the experience for our families." The room let out a collective sigh of agreement. Dave continued with the same high energy. "Well, we've got a group of these bums staying rent-free at one of our all-star resorts. Mitch, Fred, and the rest of you who've done this before, you know the drill. Tonight, it's time once again to feed the alligators. We'll be releasing our bum friends into the Magic Kingdom, and it's up to you guys to make sure they don't make it out alive." The other members, all dressed in Ralph Lauren polo shirts, exchanged high fives, like this was one of the premier perks of the Cadillac Club membership. Dave went on, 2 hours after the park closes, meet at the front gate. Everyone will rotate weapons, so you all get a turn with something different. Max, I know you wanted the crossbow last time. So Fred, why don't you try the sniper rifle or the sword this round? I sat there, stunned, thinking, what the hell did I just hear? This was Disney World, for crying out loud. The meeting adjourned, and the other 9 members officially welcomed me to the club. They came across as overconfident, cocky guys, boasting about past gator feedings. Fred bragged about nearly taking out 2 homeless people with a single crossbow shot. Max chimed in, claiming he was 150 yards away when he nailed someone with a headshot from the carousel using a sniper rifle. Their bragging carried on, with occasional comments directed at me, like they were trying to sell me on how great these events were. It felt almost like they were pitching a Disney Vacation Club package, but for carnage. Eventually, it was time to head to the front of the Magic Kingdom. The 10 of us walked together in unison from Cinderella's castle. When we arrived at the gate, there was a neatly displayed selection of weapons laid out for the club members to choose from. It seemed like a gentleman's arrangement. Max got his coveted crossbow. Pete chose the sword. Mitch took the sniper rifle, and so on. Dave was there, giving us a quick rundown. He reminded everyone to be careful, to know where each person was before using any weapons, and to spread out once we got inside. Since I was the newest member, I ended up with a handgun, probably because it was the least exciting option to the others. Soon, a Disney Magical Express bus arrived, and one by one, 20 people stepped off. It was obvious from their worn faces and tired expressions that these individuals had been dealt a rough hand in life. As the group walked past us, some of the other members started making comments like, "That one looks quick on his feet," or, "You might need 2 shots for him." The people getting off the bus didn't seem to notice us holding weapons. They were more focused on the cigarettes Steve was handing out and the promise of free food inside the Magic Kingdom. Steve clapped his hands together and said, "Let's give them 10 minutes to spread out. All the doors are locked, so they'll have to stay in the open areas. Let's keep this quick. My crew needs time to clean up before the park opens." Then, with a pop from an air gun, Steve gave the signal. The other members spread out eagerly, each ready to do whatever this was supposed to be. As for me, I knew right then and there that this wasn't for me. There was no way I was going to participate in this madness. I'd already made up my mind. I would get as many of these people out of here as I could. I moved ahead, passing Crystal's castle, and the noises from the others behind me started up. I didn't want to think about what was happening, but I could hear the shouts and chaos growing louder. Near the haunted mansion, I found 3 of the people from the group gathered together, looking confused. I quickly told them to follow me and stay close. They seemed hesitant, but they agreed. As we made our way toward Frontierland, I spotted 2 more people and convinced them to come along. By now, we were a group of 6, moving as fast as we could toward the exit. When we reached the Main Street area, Joe was standing near the gate, holding his sword. I could see from his expression that he wasn't going to let us through without a confrontation. I raised the handgun, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Let us through, Joe. I don't want to use this." He hesitated, then stepped aside with a grumble, saying, "You're making a mistake." We hurried past him. The group I was leading tried not to look at the grim scenes around us as we made our way to the gate. Standing there was Steve, looking surprised and more than a little irritated to see me with the group. Before he could say a word, I raised the gun and aimed low, firing a shot into his leg. He cried out and fell to the ground, clutching his injury. We didn't waste any time. We made it to the car pickup area, where the Uber driver was already waiting. I got everyone into the car and made arrangements to get them to Detroit later that night. I left everything behind at the Polynesian resort. My bags, my clothes, all of it. As we drove away, I knew one thing for sure. I'd never set foot in Disney again. As the car rolled through the streets of Orlando and away from the resort, I couldn't shake the weight of what had just transpired. My hands still gripped the seat, knuckles white from the tension, but I knew I had made the right decision. The weight of the past hour felt like it was pressing in on me, and I had to remind myself that I was no longer involved in whatever twisted game those men were playing. The homeless individuals in the back seat, faces still wide with confusion, looked at me like I was their savior. I didn't feel like one, not in that moment. They were just scared, lost souls who had no idea how close they had come to something much darker. And to be honest, I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt hollow. I kept my eyes ahead, the glow of streetlights casting shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was like I was leaving one world behind and stepping into another. I thought about the faces of the others, the ones I had just left behind in the park. They probably didn't even realize what they had become a part of, or worse, maybe they didn't care. For them, this was just another day in the twisted privilege they had created for themselves. I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as the city grew smaller behind us. I couldn't imagine ever wanting to return. Orlando, Disney, everything I had once thought I understood. It was all gone now. The glamour, the magic, the carefully constructed illusion. It felt like a distant memory. When we arrived at the bus station, I made sure the group got their tickets to Detroit. They thanked me in low, hushed voices, still unsure of what had really happened, still shaken. I didn't stay for their goodbyes. I didn't need to hear it. The moment I stepped back into my hotel room, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted in every way possible. My mind was reeling. What had I gotten myself into? How had I let myself slip so far into that world? It was all too much, too strange to fully process in a single night. But I knew one thing. I had to walk away. It wasn't just Disney or the club anymore. It was everything I had ever believed in, everything I had worked for, everything that made me feel like I had a place in this world. It had all been distorted, turned upside down. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I thought about my family, about Sarah, Ben, Emily. They were my anchor. They were the reason I had to leave it all behind. I could never go back to that world, not when I knew what I was capable of now. Not when I understood the kind of darkness that can take hold when you let yourself drift too far from the light. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the Polynesian resort. I took one last look at the sprawling grounds, the grand architecture that had once felt so full of wonder, but now just felt hollow. I didn't need a farewell or a goodbye. I didn't need closure. I just needed to get away. As I boarded the plane back home, I made a vow to myself. I would never be the same. I would take this experience and learn from it, and I would rebuild, closer to what truly mattered. And from that moment on, I promised myself that Disney, with all its illusions, would remain nothing but a distant memory. As the plane lifted off the ground, the noise of the engines seemed to drown out the constant chatter in my mind. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations of the flight settle over me. I needed the quiet, the stillness, the time to think and reset. It felt like I had just stepped out of a dream, but I knew it was all real. Everything was real, and the weight of what had happened was settling in like a slow, heavy fog. Back home, everything seemed different. The familiar routine of work, the laughter of Ben and Emily, the warmth of Sarah's smile. These things, simple as they were, felt like the lifelines I had been missing. I had been so caught up in the whirlwind of luxury, exclusivity, and the constant chase for more that I forgot what truly mattered. What mattered was family. It always had been. I had learned a hard lesson in Orlando. Sometimes, you don't realize the depth of the hole you're digging until you're too deep to climb out on your own. But I was lucky. I made it out. And with each passing day, I promised myself I would do better, be better. No more games. No more chasing after the next big thing that promised excitement or meaning. It was time to slow down, to live in the present, and to focus on what truly made me happy. When I got home, I sat down with Sarah, Ben, and Emily. I didn't tell them everything, of course. There were things they didn't need to know, things that didn't belong in their world. But I made a promise to them that I would never lose sight of what truly mattered again. I would be present. I would be the husband, father, and man they deserved. The days that followed were a mix of mundane, ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. I took Emily to her dance class. I coached Ben's Little League game. I had long talks with Sarah about our future, about the dreams we still wanted to pursue. And with each passing moment, I felt the weight lifting from my chest. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I also made the decision to pull back from my board memberships and volunteer work. The need for recognition, the endless push for more influence. It wasn't worth it anymore. I wanted to live a life that mattered, not one defined by the numbers on a paycheck or the people I knew. I wanted to make a difference, yes, but in ways that felt authentic and meaningful. It was time to redefine success on my own terms. One day, as I was sitting in the backyard watching Ben and Emily play, I realized how much I had been missing before all of this. The joy of a simple moment, the peace of being with the people who loved me, was enough. I knew, without a doubt, that my life was on a better path now. I was no longer seeking something that would fill an empty space I didn't even know existed. The pursuit of wealth and status had consumed me for far too long, and now, finally, I was free. Free to choose my own story, free to focus on the things that truly brought meaning to my life. As I watched Ben hit a baseball into the yard, I smiled, content. I knew this was where I was supposed to be, right here, right now, with the people I loved, surrounded by the things that mattered most. And I promised myself that, no matter what, I would never let anything or anyone take that away from me again.